My name is Marcus Gray. I grew up in a poor area of Cincinnati, Ohio. My childhood was far from easy. The three of us, me, my mother, and my younger sister, lived in a small rented house with peeling paint on the walls. My father left the family when I was 10, and from then on, my mother worked two jobs to make ends meet. Money was always tight, but that was common in our neighborhood. Our area, located on the outskirts of the city, was considered disadvantaged. In the evenings, you could often hear screams in the streets, sometimes even gunshots, showdowns between local gangs. Mom tried to keep me away from bad company. I almost never went out until late. I spent most of my time at home reading or helping my mother with the housework. The light in the window for me were textbooks and old scientific journals that I found in the school library. I was especially attracted to biology and chemistry. I was delighted with how the human body works and how science can help people. At school, I was quiet and shy, but an excellent student. Teachers praised me for my diligence and abilities, and my classmates sometimes teased me, calling me professor. I was offended, but I endured. Most of them simply did not understand me. They did not see the future that I saw when I looked at the formulas and diagrams in the textbooks. While they kicked a ball around in the vacant lot, I solved math problems, dreaming of the day when knowledge would lead me out of poverty. When it came time to choose a college, my family had no savings. However, thanks to my high grades and victories in science competitions, I received a full scholarship to one of the best universities in Ohio. I remember my mother crying with joy when she found out that my education would be paid for. For us, this was a once-in-a-lifetime chance. I promised my mother that I would not let her down and use this chance to the fullest. Leaving my home and heading off to university was a mixture of fear and excitement. A new life lay ahead of me, a life where I could escape poverty and pursue my dreams. I looked out the window of the bus taking me to the unknown streets of our neighborhood and quietly whispered, "Someday I'll come back here as a different person, and we'll never be poor again." That thought warmed me all the way. The university opened up new opportunities for me, but also presented new challenges. I entered the biomedical engineering department and threw myself into my studies. At first, it was difficult to get used to the fact that there were so many smart and talented people around. Many of my classmates came from wealthy families, drove expensive cars, and knew no need for anything. In addition to my studies, I had to work part-time as an assistant in a lab to have extra money for books and personal expenses. Sometimes in the evenings I cleaned classrooms or worked in the library, but it didn't bother me. I was happy to be where I was, and I understood what I was working for. In my third year, I met Tom, a student from my group. Tom came from a completely different world. His father was a doctor, and his mother ran her own pharmacy chain. Despite this, Tom turned out to be a simple and inquisitive guy. We became friends due to our common interest in science. We often stayed late at night in the lab, discussing bold ideas and projects. It was then, over a cup of cheap coffee from a machine, that we had an idea that would later change our lives. We were working on a term project to create a portable blood analyzer. The idea was to develop a small device that could quickly analyze dozens of different health indicators from a single drop of blood. Analyzers like these could revolutionize medicine, for example, by helping doctors make diagnoses even in remote areas where large laboratories do not exist. Our idea seemed bold but feasible. Tom and I spent several nights drawing up drawings, thinking up diagrams, and programming a rudimentary prototype of the device. Of course, it was a long way from a fully fledged device. We lacked experience, equipment, and funding. However, after graduating from university, Tom and I knew for sure that we wanted to continue working on our invention. Most of our classmates had gone to prestigious companies or went on to graduate school, but we took the risk of going our own way. We rented a small room in a business incubator at the university, which became our first lab. There was almost no money. My entire scholarship had run out, and Tom, despite his rich parents, had decided on principle not to ask them for help. We believed that we could achieve everything ourselves. The first months were full of enthusiasm and challenges. During the day, we worked part-time. I got a job as a lab technician at a university clinic, and Tom took on website development projects using his programming skills. In the evenings and on weekends, we worked on our prototype blood analyzer. At times, it seemed like we had taken on an impossible task. The device kept breaking down, the test results were inaccurate, the components were expensive. But each time we overcame another problem, we felt an incredible lift. We were inspired by the idea that our device could save many lives by simplifying the early diagnosis of diseases. I remember sitting with Tom in the dark lab late one night. The windows were shaking in the wind, and the old radiator was bubbling loudly. We were looking tiredly at another prototype on the table, a tiny circuit board with wires and sensors attached. Again, it was giving out some ridiculous numbers instead of the correct results. Tom leaned back in his chair in irritation, and I suddenly burst out laughing. He looked at me, surprised. "Imagine," I said with an unexpected smile. "A few years will pass, and our device will be in every village clinic, and we will remember how we sat here, caught glitches in the code, and thought that nothing would work out." Tom blinked in surprise at first, then smiled and nodded. That night, we went back to work with renewed vigor. So, step by step, trying and making mistakes, we were getting closer to the goal. After a year of hard work, our prototype was finally able to correctly perform a basic blood test. It was a huge breakthrough. We understood that there was still a long way to go before a commercial product. It was necessary to improve the accuracy, obtain certificates, and set up production. But the main thing was done. We proved that the idea was viable. A hope was born in our souls that our startup, as we boldly called our business, could become successful. We did not yet know what challenges awaited us ahead, but our hearts were already overflowing with pride and anticipation of future victories. Registering our startup, which we called Bioscan Diagnostics, was Tom and I's first step into adult business life. No one taught us how to run a business. We were engineers, not entrepreneurs, but we had to learn quickly as we went along. We filled out all the necessary paperwork, divided the shares equally, and even opened a bank account in the company's name. I remember how my hands shook the first time I held a bank card with our company's name on it. It seemed like yesterday I was skimping on lunches, and today I have my own company, albeit a tiny one. However, inventing the device is only half the battle. We needed to find money for its development. We decided to participate in a startup competition held by the university. Several dozen teams competed for a small grant, and the jury included invited investors. Tom and I spent our last savings to prepare a presentation. We printed colorful booklets, slightly improved the prototype, and even bought ourselves a cheap business suit at a second-hand store to look more respectable in front of the jury. The day of the presentation was one of the most nerve-wracking moments of my life. We stood on stage in front of a full room of professors, investors, and students. I was talking about our device, how it could analyze blood in minutes and save lives. My hands were sweating, my voice was shaking a little, but as soon as I looked at the screen where the results of our prototype were displayed, the nervousness subsided. I spoke passionately and with conviction because I believed in our business. Tom showed our device, conducted a demonstration on the spot. He pricked his finger, dropped blood on the sensor, and a couple of minutes later, the results appeared on the screen. The audience gasped. Everything worked flawlessly. We didn't win the competition. The prize went to another project. But after our presentation, a middle-aged man in an elegant suit approached us. He introduced himself as a venture investor named Richard Van Camp. Richard praised our idea and offered to have coffee to discuss the project in more detail. My heart almost jumped out of my chest. For the first time, someone was seriously interested in us. That same week, we met Richard in a small cafe. He immediately got down to business. He was ready to invest $200,000 in Bioscan Diagnostics in exchange for a share in the company. For us, this was a huge amount of money, a chance to hire more engineers, improve the prototype, and begin the certification process. Tom and I looked at each other, barely holding back our joyful smiles, and agreed. That's how we got our first investor. Having received funding, We rented a small room for a real lab and hired a couple of talented graduates as research engineers. The work began to boil with renewed vigor. In a year, we managed to turn our rough prototype into a working sample of the device, ready for certification testing. We called the device Bioscan 1. It was a compact device the size of a small printer, which could conduct a full blood test for the main parameters in 10 minutes. For rural clinics and emergency situations, it was an indispensable thing. When the first tests confirmed the accuracy of the results, we had real success. Bioscan 1 was featured in several scientific journals and even a local newspaper, calling Tom and me young geniuses from Cincinnati. New investors started knocking on our doors, offering to invest. We raised another round of funding, raised millions of dollars, and expanded our team. Experienced managers and marketing specialists appeared. Our small company grew and strengthened. By that time, I was 27 years old, and life was spinning at a frantic pace. Endless meetings, tests, negotiations with potential buyers of the device. I tried not to forget where I came from, and every day in my soul, I thanked fate for this chance. A couple of years after the first investment, we were faced with a new choice. Either continue to develop the company independently, enter the market, and compete with the giants of medical technology, or sell our brainchild to a large corporation. We already had offers from several well-known medical companies interested in our technology. We discussed this issue with Tom a lot. On the one hand, we wanted to retain control and bring Bioscan 1 to hospitals on our own. On the other hand, the proposed amount for the purchase of our startup could provide us with a comfortable life and give us resources for new projects. Finally, after many sleepless nights of contemplation, we accepted an offer to sell. One of the largest corporations in the medical industry offered several $100 million for Bioscan diagnostics. As the negotiations and sums were discussed, my head was spinning. It seemed impossible that figures with so many zeros could refer to the fruits of our labor. The deal was done, and Tom and I became multimillionaires overnight. I remember the day the money arrived in my personal account. I was sitting in front of my laptop screen and looking at the balance, where the amount I could not even dream of was flaunting. My fingers were shaking over the keyboard. My first impulse was to call my mother. When I dialed her number, my voice betrayed me by becoming hoarse. "Mom, remember how I promised that we would no longer be poor?" I said, barely containing my emotions. "Now everything will be fine." My mother could not believe it for a long time while I was telling her the news. She cried into the phone, repeating that she was proud of me. I spent that evening talking to her and my sister. My little sister squealed with joy when she learned that I was going to pay for her education in any college she chose. A week after selling the company, I returned to Cincinnati for the first time in several years. This time I flew first class, and upon arrival I rented a decent car, something I could not have dreamed of in my youth. But that was not what pleased me most. I brought gifts for my mother and the keys to a new house that I had previously looked at not far from the city. That old place with peeling walls and a leaky roof would finally be a thing of the past. We celebrated my return and success with a large family dinner. Mom cooked my favorite dishes, although now I could have invited them to an expensive restaurant. But home cooking and laughter of loved ones were the best reward for me after all the trials. That night, lying in my old children's room, I couldn't fall asleep for a long time. I looked at the ceiling and remembered the path I had taken. I had achieved even more than I had dreamed of. I had escaped poverty, helped my family, brought to life an invention that I believed would benefit people. It seemed that here it was the happiness I deserved. And at that moment, I couldn't even imagine what new trials fate had in store for me. I met Vanessa Sinclair about a year after we sold our company. After years of intense work on the startup and the subsequent deal, life had finally slowed down and I was allowing myself to take a break. One fall, an old friend of mine, Richard Van Camp, the same investor who believed in us in the beginning, invited me to a charity reception in New York. It was a social event in support of medical research where wealthy donors, doctors, scientists, and entrepreneurs gathered. Richard said it was a good opportunity to make useful connections and just relax. I remember feeling a little out of place in this glittering company. I was wearing an expensive suit, but I still found myself thinking that I was still the same guy from Cincinnati who grew up among peeling walls. Waiters were bustling about with champagne, ladies in evening gowns were chatting animatedly, and men in tuxedos were discussing the latest business news. I was standing by a massive marble column, wondering who to strike up a conversation with, when suddenly a soft female voice came from behind me. "Are you the inventor that was recently written about in the newspapers?" A soft female voice came from behind me. I turned around and saw an attractive young woman. Her blonde hair was neatly styled, her face was smiling kindly, and her eyes were shining with genuine interest. She was slightly shorter than me, wearing an elegant dark blue dress. My heart skipped a beat. "Perhaps they wrote it about me," I answered, trying to hide my slight embarrassment. "Marcus Gray." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Marcus." The stranger extended her hand to me. "My name is Vanessa Sinclair." I recognized the name immediately, of course. The Sinclair family was well known in business circles. Her father, William Sinclair, owned an investment company and was considered one of the most influential people on the East Coast. But at that moment, all that faded into the background. For me, the name Vanessa rang with a special warmth, and I looked at her, enchanted by her presence. The conversation started easily. Vanessa told me that she graduated from Columbia University and works for her mother's charity, working on programs to help children with congenital diseases. She was genuinely interested in my project, asking how I came up with the idea for the analyzer and whether it was difficult to launch a startup. Her questions were genuinely passionate, and I was flattered that such a girl was paying so much attention to my work. Almost an hour passed unnoticed in conversation. We each took a glass of champagne and moved away from the noisy crowd closer to the window niche. Vanessa laughed at some of my jokes about student experiments, and I could not take my eyes off the way the light fell softly on her face. I felt surprisingly at ease next to her, as if we had known each other for many years. At some point, she lightly touched my arm, drawing my attention to something funny at the other end of the room, and goosebumps ran down my skin. As the evening drew to a close, I felt I simply had to see Vanessa again. She seemed to be thinking the same thing, because she was the first to ask. "Marcus, do you often visit New York? I would be interested in continuing our conversation over a cup of coffee sometime." I tried to remain calm and replied that I planned to stay in the city for a couple more days and would be happy to meet. We exchanged phone numbers. As I left the reception, I already knew that this meeting was fateful. Our first real date was the next day at a cozy cafe in downtown Manhattan. We felt even freer without ties and evening dresses. Vanessa came in a simple sweater and jeans, but she looked no less beautiful for it. We walked for a long time through the autumn Central Park, talking about everything under the sun from childhood memories to favorite books. I learned that Vanessa grew up in prosperity, but her parents raised her strictly. She studied music from a young age, traveled a lot, but always felt the pressure of expectations from her family. I shared stories about my childhood in Cincinnati, about how my mother taught me to never give up. Vanessa listened attentively, sometimes amazed by what I had to go through. The difference in our life starts did not hinder us at all. On the contrary, it seemed that we complemented each other. I showed Vanessa a world full of persistence and faith in a dream, and she opened the doors to me into the world of refined culture and charity. A few weeks after we met, I was already flying to New York to visit her every weekend, or she was flying to visit me. We visited exhibitions and concerts together, dined in expensive restaurants, but could just as easily order pizza and watch old movies at my place. However, my first meeting with her family was not easy. A couple of months into our relationship, Vanessa invited me to her mother Melinda Sinclair's birthday party. The celebration was held at their country mansion in Connecticut. I remember being very nervous about choosing a gift and hoping to make a good impression. The Sinclair mansion was stunning in its luxury. Marble floors, antique furniture, a huge, well-kept garden. I was greeted politely but coolly. Vanessa's father, a tall, gray-haired man with piercing eyes, shook my hand appraisingly. My mother was polite, but there was a hidden arrogance in her tone. During dinner, Vanessa's parents asked me about my education, business, and plans for the future. I answered as best I could, trying to be polite. Vanessa supported me with her eyes the whole time. Her presence gave me confidence. After that night, I asked Vanessa what she thought of the impression I had made on her parents. She kissed me with a smile and said it wasn't that bad. They were cold to almost everyone at first. "Give them time, they'll see how wonderful you are," she whispered. I wanted to believe that would be the case. Our romance was rapidly gaining momentum. 6 months after our meeting at that charity event, I knew for sure that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with Vanessa. I had truly fallen in love, deeply for the first time, and judging by the sparkle in her eyes when she looked at me, Vanessa felt the same way. During one of my trips to New York, I decided to propose to her. It happened in a cozy French restaurant where Vanessa had long wanted to go. I had chosen a ring in advance, an elegant platinum band with a small diamond, graceful and refined, like Vanessa herself. I admit that when the waiter brought dessert, and next to the plate lay a velvet case, my palms were covered in sweat. But as soon as I stood up and said the words of love that filled my heart, all doubts disappeared. Vanessa burst into tears of happiness and answered with consent, to the applause of the few guests of the restaurant. That evening we seemed like the happiest couple in the world. I couldn't be happier. Fate had given me not only success and money, but also the love of my life. At least, I was sure of it then. Our wedding had been planned for several months, and it was a hectic time, although Vanessa's family took care of most of the organizational issues. My bride dreamed of a beautiful ceremony, and the Sinclairs could afford it. There were hundreds of guests to invite, a luxurious country club to rent for the celebration, and the menu and decor to be thought out in the smallest detail. To be honest, the preparation process itself was exhausting for me. I never strived for pomp. But seeing how enthusiastically Vanessa chose flowers and tasted cakes, I didn't mind. The main thing was that she was happy. However, a few weeks before the appointed date, an unpleasant conversation took place that slightly dampened our pre-wedding mood. One evening, when I visited the Sinclairs to discuss some details of the ceremony, her father, William, asked me to accompany him to his study. It was a spacious, richly furnished room, the walls of which were decorated with old paintings and family photographs in heavy frames. William motioned for me to sit in the leather chair opposite his desk. "Marcus," he began dryly, folding his hands in front of him, "I hope you understand that this conversation is delicate, but necessary." My heart skipped a beat. I nodded silently and felt my palms become treacherously sweaty. "We're talking about a prenuptial agreement," William continued. "You know our family has a considerable fortune, and although Vanessa is smart and knows how to make money herself, her mother and I have always believed that such agreements are good for both parties." He emphasized the last words, apparently reminding me that I now had a considerable fortune. I tensed up even more. Of course, I had heard of such situations. Rich parents wanting to protect assets by demanding a prenuptial agreement. But it was one thing to hear it, and quite another to sit across from a future father-in-law who was actually setting a condition. "Do you think this is necessary?" I asked, trying to speak evenly. "Does Vanessa know about this?" Of course, William nodded. "This is the condition of our family. Believe me, it is not a matter of personal mistrust of you. It is simply a wise precaution. I think you, as a reasonable person, will understand everything." He pulled out a desk drawer and took out a thin folder. "Here is a draft of the prenuptial agreement. You should read it carefully. In short, each of you retains rights to the property that belonged to you before the marriage. Financial assets and investments that Vanessa owns will remain hers alone. Your fortune, accordingly, will remain yours. You will be able to divide the property jointly acquired during the marriage in the event of a divorce by mutual agreement or according to the conditions set out here." He nodded at the folder he handed me. I automatically took the documents, feeling extremely uncomfortable. My throat was dry. "We wouldn't want it to come to that, of course," William added with a cold smile. "But life is long, you know. It will be calmer for everyone." I looked down at the papers. The words were wandering before my eyes. Did they really think I needed their money? After all, I have enough money now. I don't need anything. And I love Vanessa. I'm not marrying for profit. But I couldn't say anything harsh in response. It could offend Vanessa and ruin my relationship with her family completely. I understand, I replied. Of course, I'll take a look. That's right, William nodded, rising from his chair, making it clear that the conversation was over. You can take a copy and consult with your lawyers if you need to, but frankly, it's all standard. I left the office, feeling my face burning. Vanessa was already waiting for me in the hallway. She looked a little embarrassed and worried. She probably guessed what we were talking about with her father. Marcus, she said quietly, looking into my eyes, did Dad tell you? About the marriage contract? I said so, I answered, trying to remain calm. Vanessa looked down. Please understand, they always do this. It's not because they treat you badly. It's just, they have this habit of controlling everything. I saw that she was uncomfortable. I raised my hand and gently touched her cheek. It's all good, I said. I understand everything. Formalities, right? Vanessa breathed a sigh of relief and snuggled closer to me. Of course, formalities. I love you, Marcus. I don't care about all these papers. If it weren't for my parents, I wouldn't even mention it. I hugged her. My head was buzzing, but I gradually calmed down next to her. After all, she was right. These were just papers. I had no intention of laying claim to their family capital, and I had created my own business. So was it worth quarreling with my future relatives out of pride? A couple of days later, I signed all the necessary documents. I did show the contract briefly to my lawyer, and he confirmed that the terms looked standard. No hidden pitfalls. Neither Vanessa nor I would be entitled to any of each other's property in the event of a divorce, except for the agreed-upon amounts. My fiancé and I signed the papers at the notary without unnecessary fuss. Standing next to Vanessa that day, all I could think about was getting it over with and not returning to this issue again, since divorce and infidelity were not in my plans. I wanted to focus again on the pleasant chores, choosing music for the first dance, greeting guests, preparing vows. The wedding itself was like a beautiful dream. The ceremony took place on the lawn of a country club, drowning in flowers. Vanessa was incomparable in her snow-white dress with a long train. When she walked towards me on the arm of her father, and the orchestra played soft music, I caught my breath. It seemed that just a little more and I would wake up. But it was reality. The woman I loved was approaching to become my wife. There were over 200 guests at the ceremony. On Vanessa's side, there were her father's business partners, numerous relatives, and family friends. On my side, there were far fewer guests. My mother, my sister she had flown in especially for the wedding, glowing in a new dress we had chosen together, a few friends from university, and Tom, my loyal comrade in arms. I admit, watching my mother standing a little confused among the dressed-up rich, I had mixed feelings. On the one hand, I was proud. My mother saw where my dream had led me, what a celebration I had been able to organize. On the other hand, I was slightly sad. Vanessa's father was nodding in greeting to some senators and bankers, while my mother smiled modestly, not knowing how to behave among these people. I walked up to her and took her arm, thanked her for raising me, and told her that I loved her. My mother just nodded, wiping away tears of joy. When the time came to exchange vows, I looked into Vanessa's tear-stained eyes and spoke of how she had changed my life, how she had given me love and happiness. She whispered back words about how kind and strong I was, and how she felt safer next to me than ever before. The priest pronounced us husband and wife, and to thunderous applause I kissed my wife. In the evening, there was a lavish reception with dinner, dancing, and toasts. Congratulations were heard. One after another people came up and wished us happiness. One of Vanessa's relatives even joked that finally the family had a techie millionaire. I responded with a polite smile to such attacks, trying not to attach any importance to them. The main thing was how Vanessa was shining. She was spinning around in a dance with me, laughing and shining with happiness. At that moment, I again felt that all this was right. That, Despite our different roots, we had created a strong family based on love. After the wedding, we flew away on a short trip, spent a week on the coast of Italy, enjoying each other's company. It was our little wedding adventure. I didn't even notice how quickly these days flew by in serene happiness. Returning home, I enthusiastically thought about what awaited us ahead. A life together, perhaps children, new achievements. It seemed to me that all the problems were behind us, and only a bright future lay ahead. How wrong I was then. Our first year of marriage flew by. Vanessa and I split our time between two capitals. We had an apartment in Manhattan, a wedding gift from her parents, and a house in the Boston suburbs that I bought closer to one of the research centers where I had started a new project. I couldn't sit idle, and soon after returning from our honeymoon, I plunged into work. I was lucky. The financial cushion I received from selling my startup allowed me to invest in what I was interested in. I founded a small venture fund through which I invested in promising biomedical companies. In addition, I was invited to head the board of directors of a research center engaged in developments in the field of genetics. I dove headlong into these projects, feeling the long-forgotten excitement of scientific activity. At first, Vanessa enthusiastically supported my endeavors. She liked that I was continuing to develop, and she proudly told her friends what her husband was doing. We often appeared together at various events, at the opening of a new clinic supported by her charity foundation, or at a scientific conference where I gave a report. She willingly accompanied me, shining in society and sincerely interested in what was happening in my field. But gradually, the euphoria of the first few years began to give way to the reality of everyday life. My projects were demanding more and more of my time. I would go to Boston or Silicon Valley for a week or two on foundation business, and when I returned, I would find that Vanessa had been attending social events and parties alone or with friends in my absence. Sometimes I would hear a hint of resentment in her voice when she would say, "You're leaving again? Oh well, I'll find something to do." I tried to compensate for my absence. I brought gifts, arranged short weekend getaways for us, like suddenly booking a house by the lake or a table at a restaurant on the roof of a skyscraper. Vanessa was happy, but over time it began to seem to me that there was some kind of fatigue lurking behind her smile. The Sinclairs saw their family often. We would go to their mansion for dinner almost every couple of weeks or meet up in town for events. I tried to maintain good relations with William and Melinda. On the surface, everything was decent. They treated me politely and sometimes even in a friendly manner. But sometimes I caught myself thinking that there was always a certain distance in their attitude towards me, as if I remained a stranger to them, despite all my successes and even my official status as a family member. Around the third year of our marriage, I began to notice that things weren't going well for the Sinclair family. At first, it was small stuff. William casually mentioned over dinner that the financial market was going through a rough patch, and a couple of his investments weren't doing as expected. Melinda complained to Vanessa that they had to sell their vacation home in Florida. "We hardly go there anyway." Vanessa didn't think much of it, but my professional instincts told me that there might be more to it. I knew that William's company was involved in investing in various projects, and the economy had been going through a rough patch in recent years. One evening, when I returned home later than usual, I found Vanessa sitting alone in the living room, a glass of wine in her hand. The lights were dim, and the television, with the news on silent, flickered across her face. She looked upset. "Is everything okay?" I asked, sitting down next to her and gently hugging her shoulders. Vanessa tried to smile, but it came out forced. "Yeah, just a little tired," she answered quietly, looking away. "Mom called today. They have their own problems. I don't want to burden you." I became wary. Vanessa had never hidden her feelings from me before. "Tell me," I asked softly. "Maybe it will make me feel better." She sighed and, twirling the stem of the glass in her fingers, quietly said, "Dad's business. They're having trouble right now. I don't know the details, but Mom said things are going from bad to worse. It seems a couple of their big investment fund clients have left, and they're having liquidity problems." I frowned. Despite my less than cordial relationship with my father-in-law, I didn't want them to go broke. Do they need help? Maybe I could support them with something, I asked cautiously. Vanessa shook her head. I don't think Dad will accept direct help. He's too proud. And he didn't ask for anything. Mom is just worried. She's afraid that if things go really badly, they'll have to cut back a lot. They've never known anything like this. I nodded, realizing that the blow would be painful for a family accustomed to luxury. Inwardly, I was already weighing up my options. Could I find new partners for William's company or invest myself? The sums involved were probably huge, though. And how would William react to my mercy? If anything happens, let me know, was all I said then. We'll figure something out together. Vanessa thanked me and snuggled up to me. I felt her trembling. I felt sorry for her. Whatever her family was, they were her parents, and it was hard for her to see their problems. After that conversation, I began to think seriously about the Sinclair's situation. Through mutual friends in financial circles, I unobtrusively found out that William's investment company was indeed suffering major losses. There were rumors that he had invested in several failed projects, and then the market had hit the rest of his assets. The press had not written about it yet, but it seemed that bankruptcy was a real threat. I knew it was pointless to openly offer money to the proud William. Instead, I once started a conversation with him on neutral grounds, saying that if he needed new investment ideas or connections, I would be happy to help, because I have experience in startups, science, and contacts in the world of technology. My father-in-law thanked me, but refused to give details, throwing only, "Thank you, Marcus. If I need anything, I'll contact you." His tone made it clear that it was better not to interfere. Nevertheless, the tension in the air was growing. Vanessa became more nervous, although she tried to hide it. She still smiled at receptions, but at home she could suddenly flare up over a trifle, or, on the contrary, withdraw into herself. I understood. She was worried about her parents' situation, and our little disagreements about my absence did not go away. One day, when we were having dinner together at home, Vanessa suddenly said, putting down her fork, "You know, I was thinking, our marriage contract is probably no longer necessary. We've been together for so many years, we trust each other. What do you think?" I was taken aback when I heard this. The question came out of nowhere. To be honest, I haven't thought about it, I admitted, putting the napkin aside. It doesn't seem to bother me. Vanessa shrugged and went back to picking at her salad. My parents were just wondering. They said, if we're together forever anyway, then why are there these formalities between us? This remark scratched me. Just recently, her parents insisted on a contract, and now it's bothering them. It's strange to hear this from them, I answered cautiously. Why all of a sudden? Vanessa sighed. I don't know. Probably the elder Sinclairs just changed their view of the situation. Before, they were worried about my well-being, and now they are worried about the family business. They probably feel calmer knowing that within the family there are no barriers in the form of these papers. I frowned. The explanation sounded unconvincing, but I didn't want to develop the topic and just smiled. Let's not rush, I said softly. The contract doesn't interfere with our love. Vanessa nodded, but I could tell she was disappointed. We barely spoke for the rest of the meal. Alarm bells rang in my head. Why would I really want to cancel a contract that wasn't hurting anyone? I tried to push aside my suspicions that this might just be Vanessa's parents' way of showing their trust in me as a family member. But my heart was still aching. A few weeks after that dinner, the prenuptial agreement came up again, this time in a much more forceful form. One Sunday, Vanessa's parents invited us to a family dinner. I had a feeling the conversation might turn to business, but I hoped it wouldn't get too unpleasant. The dinner was held in its usual pomp, a long table, silverware, immaculately folded linen napkins. But the atmosphere was tense. William sat sullenly, barely touching his food. Melinda feigned cordiality, but her smile seemed forced. Vanessa secretly squeezed my hand under the table. After dessert, William leaned back in his chair and spoke, looking straight at me. Marcus, Melinda, and I were thinking. It's time for us to reconsider some family arrangements. I slowly put the glass of wine on the table. My heart sank. My premonition was justified. What are you talking about? I asked calmly, although everything inside me was tense. Melinda folded her hands on the table and smiled wearily. Darling, we are talking about your marriage contract with Vanessa. You have been married for several years. We consider you our son. We think that there is no need to keep these formalities between close people any longer. She spoke softly, but her gaze was sharp, studying my reaction. Vanessa looked down, avoiding my gaze. I understand what you mean, I answered cautiously. But you were the one who insisted on a contract before the wedding. What changed? William exhaled loudly, as if holding back his irritation. Life has changed, he said sharply. Back then, you were a young upstart, eager to join our family. Forgive my frankness, but we didn't know you. Now things are different. We do business together, we trust each other. I felt the blood rush to my face. William's words stung, though I tried not to show it. I thought we trusted each other already, I said, trying to keep my voice even. Does a contract stop us from living as a family? Melinda leaned forward slightly, joining the conversation in a soft tone. Marcus, my dear, don't think anything bad. It's just that times are hard now. It's important for a family to stick together without unnecessary barriers. What if we have to quickly resolve financial issues and then this document that ties our hands? I looked at her. A tense expression appeared on my mother-in-law's face, revealing hidden anxiety. It seemed that they were afraid that it would be humiliating for them to directly admit their problems, so they tried to protect themselves in this way, in a roundabout way. If we're talking about financial matters, I said slowly, then I don't think the contract prevents me from helping if needed, unless you're planning a divorce, but I hope it won't come to that. I chuckled, trying to lighten the mood with a humorous tone, but it came out forced. William immediately became stern. Nobody's talking about divorce, he snapped. This is about trust. You can show now that you really trust our family and don't have any back doors. Vanessa tugged at my sleeve, quietly asking, Marcus, please. They have the best intentions. I looked at my wife. There were tears in her eyes. She was torn between loyalty to her parents and to me. I didn't want to make a scene. I exhaled, trying to pull myself together. Okay, I said, looking at William. You're suggesting that we annul the marriage contract. But it's not just a piece of paper. You can't just annul it right away. You need an agreement, signatures, and a notary. No problem with that, William chuckled coldly. Our lawyers have already prepared everything. He nodded to Melinda, who pulled a thin folder from under the napkin on her lap and placed it in front of me. I recognized the logo of a well-known law firm. Here are the cancellation documents, the mother-in-law said with feigned ease. All we need is your signature and Vanessa's signature, and the previous agreement will no longer be in effect. I felt a chill run down my spine. It seemed they had planned everything in advance, confident that I would agree to sign without looking. There was a tense silence in the dining room. Everyone was waiting for my reaction. I glanced briefly at Vanessa, who looked scared and pleadingly at me. Perhaps she hoped I would give in for her sake. You're in a hurry, I said quietly, trying to speak politely but firmly. I can't sign a document that I haven't even had time to read and think about. William wanted to object, but I raised my hand, stopping him. I understand your motives. Let's do it this way. I'll take the papers, read them carefully, and perhaps consult with my lawyer. This is a serious decision, and I'm not ready to make it on the spot. My words hung in the air. William's face tightened. Melinda frowned. It seemed they hadn't expected such a rebuff. Marcus. Melinda began, but I had already gotten up from the table, carefully picking up the folder. I hope for your understanding. Well, of course, William drawled icily, rising after her. But remember, boy, family values loyalty. I wouldn't want to doubt yours. It was a veiled threat. My heart started beating faster, but I nodded silently. Inside, everything was boiling. I was being made out to be almost a traitor, just because I didn't want to sign their paper in the heat of the moment. Vanessa rushed to say goodbye to her parents, whispering something soothing. I, having said goodbye coldly, headed for the exit. A heavy feeling was spreading in my chest, a mixture of resentment and anxiety. Vanessa and I barely spoke the entire way home. She just quietly said that she was sorry it had all turned out this way and that her parents were just stressed out about the problems. I nodded, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, and said nothing. That evening, Tom came to see me. I invited him under the pretext of discussing one of the projects, but in reality I couldn't resist and told my friend everything in full. We sat in the kitchen over glasses of beer, and I told him about the pressure from the Sinclair family. "I don't like it, Mark." Tom shook his head after listening to me. "I really don't like it. It's to their advantage to remove the prenuptial agreement now, you know that. Without it, in a divorce, Vanessa could lay claim to half of your assets, and considering their situation." "I know," I said gloomily. "I just don't want to think that they're willing to do something mean for the sake of money." "You told me yourself how you were cornered today," Tom reminded me. "Let's go." I rubbed my face tiredly with my hand. Tom sighed and put his hand on my shoulder. "Look, you're a smart guy. Don't give in to their pressure. The contract protects you. Without it, you become extremely vulnerable, especially if—" He stopped. "If Vanessa decides to file for divorce," I finished his thought bitterly. "Well, yes," the friend quietly confirmed. "Sorry for being blunt." I paused, feeling my insides tighten at the prospect. Divorce from Vanessa. I loved her. I still do. But her family had cornered us. "Thank you, Tom," I said finally. "Now the main thing is not to make any sudden movements." Tom nodded. "That's right. Don't sign anything without a thorough analysis. Or better yet, don't sign anything at all." Before leaving, he suddenly asked, "Whose side do you think Vanessa is on?" I shrugged tiredly. "I want to believe that. But she is very dependent on her parents. She feels sorry for them. She probably hopes that I will give in for the sake of saving them." Tom didn't answer, just smiled wryly, making it clear that his opinion was less optimistic. After my friend left, I sat in the dark of the office for a long time, staring at the folder with the documents about the cancellation of the contract. Vanessa had already gone to bed in the next room. She had locked our marital bedroom from the inside, saying that she wanted to be alone. It was the first time we had gone to bed separately since the fight. Conflicting emotions warred within me. I still loved my wife, and I wanted to support her family as best I could. But the demand that I give up the contract that protected me from possible betrayal felt like a trap. Tom was right. Without that insurance, I would be alone against whatever they were planning. And were they planning something evil? I didn't know. But now the trust between me and the Sinclairs was shattered. I put the file away in a drawer without opening it. That night, I fell asleep with a heavy heart, unaware that a blow far more painful than family squabbles lay ahead. After that tense conversation with Vanessa's family, our relationship had noticeably cooled. She was still worried about the situation with her parents, and I was worried about the pressure they were trying to put on me. There was a feeling of wariness in the house. It was as if we were living on different islands. We would meet at breakfast, exchange a few routine phrases, and then go our separate ways. In the evenings, Vanessa would increasingly go to bed earlier than me or lock herself in her room, citing a migraine or fatigue. For the first time in our marriage, a wall of misunderstanding had grown between us. I tried to establish communication. The day after the ill-fated dinner at the Sinclairs, I bought a huge bouquet of her favorite white lilies and invited Vanessa to dinner at our favorite restaurant. She agreed, but the whole evening she was kind of distant. I told her a funny story from work, and she smiled absently, barely listening. I tried to talk about what was bothering us, like, let's discuss everything frankly. But Vanessa shook her head. "Not now, Marcus. Let's just have dinner." The last words sounded tired, as if she had made up her mind long ago. After that, I gave her space, thinking that time would heal the hurt. But it only got worse. Vanessa often stayed out late. Before, she would always warn me if her plans changed. Honey, I'm going to be late meeting a friend, or we have an unscheduled dinner at the foundation. Now she would simply not show up for dinner, then dryly say, sorry, I had to stay late, and retreat to the bedroom, closing the door. I noticed other changes too. She kept her phone with her at all times, even in the bathroom. She changed the password to a different one, although we used to know each other's codes and didn't make a secret of it. Several times during the night I woke up and she wasn't there. In the morning, she explained that she couldn't sleep and was drinking tea in the kitchen or reading a book in the living room. But once I heard a muffled voice downstairs, Vanessa was talking quietly on the phone, thinking that I was asleep. Hearing the creaking of the stairs, she immediately cut off the conversation. She told me that it was a friend calling from another time zone at the wrong time. I didn't answer, but a worm of doubt stirred. After that incident, I couldn't help but pay closer attention. One day, when Vanessa was taking a shower, her phone, left on the dressing table in the bedroom, blinked with an incoming message. I glanced at the screen. There was a name there, Nicholas Work, and a short text. Miss you. See you tomorrow. My chest went cold. Nicholas, Work. I didn't know any Nicholases around her. My heart started beating wildly. I took a few steps around the room, not knowing what to think. The message quickly disappeared from the screen. Apparently, she had set the preview to auto-hide. I stood in the middle of the bedroom, feeling like the ground was slipping out from under my feet. That night, I didn't say anything. My mind told me not to jump to conclusions. Maybe this was some kind of misunderstanding, but a deep feeling inside already knew the truth. Vanessa was cheating on me. The following days turned into torture for me. Vanessa acted as if nothing had happened, but I noticed every little thing. She began to pay more attention to her appearance before leaving the house, new perfume, more revealing dresses, although she was supposedly going to business meetings. She returned with a mysterious half-smile, or, on the contrary, with an anxious look, as if torn apart by internal torment. But she was cold with me and answered my attempts to talk in monosyllables. Our intimate life came to naught. She avoided intimacy, citing either a headache or a bad mood. All the signs screamed that something or someone, a third party, had come between us. I felt broken. During the day, I tried to distract myself with work, but the thought of my wife's betrayal did not give me peace. At night, I tossed and turned. Images popped into my head. Vanessa with another man, her laughter, kisses that were not meant for me. These thoughts made me feel sick, and my hands clenched into fists. Finally, realizing that I could no longer live in uncertainty, I decided to find out the truth. I didn't have the strength to openly ask Vanessa if she was cheating on me. I was afraid of either hearing confirmation or being slandered and exposed as paranoid, so I chose a different path. Remembering Tom's advice to keep it simple, I hired a private detective. He was a middle-aged man I knew from one of my projects, Jeff, who had previously worked in law enforcement. I explained the problem to him without unnecessary details. I suspected that my wife was seeing someone else, and I needed the facts. Jeff nodded understandingly. Apparently, this was not the first time he had encountered such a thing. We agreed that he would act quickly and confidentially. I gave him photos of Vanessa, her work schedule, and the events I knew about, her license plate number, and the addresses of places she frequented. Jeff said he would start the next day. Waiting for the results of the investigation became torture for me. I found myself in conflicting desires. I wanted to get immediate proof to end the uncertainty, and I prayed that the detective would find nothing and that my suspicions would be false. A few days later, Jeff called and said curtly, "We should meet. I have something you need to see." His tone sent a chill through me. We agreed to meet in the evening in my office when no one would be there. I was not myself all day. Vanessa went somewhere in the morning, saying only, "I'll be late, don't wait up." I nodded automatically, feeling how everything inside me was freezing. Probably to him. To Nikolai. At the appointed time, Jeff came to me. He brought an envelope with photos and a flash drive with videos. With a heavy heart, I sat down at the table and turned on the desk lamp. Jeff, seeing my condition, sympathetically patted me on the shoulder, but I barely noticed it. In the very first photo, Vanessa was standing near the entrance to the hotel. The clock said about 8 in the evening. The date and time were visible in the corner of the photo. She was wearing the same red dress she had worn to meet her friends a couple of days ago. Vanessa was clearly waiting for someone. The next photos showed her hugging a tall, dark-haired man near the elevator in the same hotel. My heart sank. I recognized this man. Nikolai Voronov, a financier from Williams Circle, their longtime partner. I didn't know that there could be a connection between him and Vanessa, but the photos spoke for themselves. In one photo, they were kissing, not hiding from Jeff's camera lens. I closed my eyes, trying to fight off the wave of rage and pain that washed over me, but I had to watch it to the end. The next shot, them entering the room number also recorded. An hour later, as Jeff said, he was waiting. They left the hotel separately, 10 minutes apart, so as not to attract attention. But the detective managed to film this too. I felt something die inside me as I looked at these images. The last hope of a mistake was gone. Vanessa had cheated on me, with that same Nikolai who, I now remembered, was often present at our family events. Perhaps it was through her father's business that they had become close, and I was too blind, too absorbed in my work and problems to notice. "I'm very sorry," Jeff said quietly. "I think it will be more than enough for the court if you decide to." I nodded mechanically, hiding the trembling in my hands. Yes, this evidence would be enough for a court and for any showdown. But right now, I was least interested in the legal aspects. I was trying to figure out what to do next, how to live with this knowledge. After the detective left, I sat in the quiet office for a long time. The photographs lay on the table in front of me, like fragments of a shattered life. Was this the end of my love? Apparently, yes. Outside the windows, the night was gathering. I had a difficult decision to make. Confrontation was inevitable. But I swore to myself that I would approach this with a cool head. I had been used and deceived. Now I had the trump cards, and I was going to use them. The night I learned the truth, I came home late. Vanessa wasn't home yet. I sat in the living room in the semi-darkness, holding the envelope with the photos on my lap, and waited. My soul was torn apart by contradictions. Part of me wanted to scream, to spill out all the pain and rage at the sight of my wife, while the other part coldly calculated the next steps, as if it were a game of chess. The clock struck midnight when the front door quietly opened. Vanessa tiptoed in, probably thinking I was already asleep. In the dim light of the hallway lamp, I could see she was wearing an elegant dress, her makeup slightly smudged, her hair disheveled. The scent of someone else's cologne hung around her, barely perceptible. My heart sank in pain, but I forced myself to remain calm. "It's too late," I said quietly. Vanessa jumped in surprise and turned to me. Fear flashed in her eyes, then she quickly put on a mask of tired indifference. "You haven't gone to bed yet?" she asked, putting her bag on the nightstand. "I told you I'd be late." "I warned you, of course," I responded quietly. "You were meeting with your friends, right?" She nodded, avoiding my eyes. Anger and bitterness boiled inside me. I pulled one of the photographs out of the envelope and placed it face up on the coffee table in front of me. "It's funny," I said, trying to speak evenly. "Your friends have started to look a lot like Nikolaev." Vanessa frowned, but continued to pretend she didn't understand. "What are you talking about?" I silently pointed to the photograph. It clearly showed Vanessa and that same Nikolai kissing at the door of a hotel room. In the semi-darkness of the room, the picture looked like a guilty verdict. My wife turned pale. She slowly looked down at the photo, then back at me. In the silence that followed, I could only hear my own heartbeat. "Marcus, it's not what you think," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. "Not that?" I asked quietly, feeling the cold rage rising. "Isn't that a photograph of you with your lover?" Vanessa closed her eyes and a tear rolled down her cheek. It was one time." She began, but I stood up abruptly, causing her to recoil. "Once?" I repeated with a bitter smile. So you accidentally kissed him outside the hotel and accidentally spent a couple of hours there. And the confession messages were also an accident. Vanessa covered her face with her hands and sobbed. Everything inside me was turning over, both from her tears and from the disgust at what was happening. Why? Was all I asked after a pause, a little quieter. Why are you doing this to me? She dropped her hands, her face a mixture of despair and anger. You ask why? She suddenly blurted out, and a nervous note sounded in her voice. Because I didn't know what to do anymore. You distanced yourself from me, took up your own affairs. My family is falling apart, and you stand your ground, thinking only about the contract, about the money. I looked at her in shock, not believing my ears. Do you blame me? I said coldly. Don't you think everything is upside down? It was your family that decided to use me. Your father forced me to cancel the contract, knowing about his debts. And you, instead of supporting your husband, you ran into the arms of your lover. Vanessa burst into tears, sinking into the chair opposite. I didn't mean to hurt you, she sobbed. I was just desperate. Nikolai promised to help Dad with the company if we got closer. Everything got out of control. I was shaking from these confessions. So that's how it was, a deal to save the family. So you went to bed with him for the money? I asked harshly. To save Daddy's business. Vanessa screamed and covered her ears with her hands. Stop it. It wasn't that cynical. I was confused. It hurt me that you turned away from us, from our problems. Turned away? I laughed bitterly. Yes, I offered to help your proud daddy. He refused. I was ready to do a lot for you. But you chose a different path, the path of deception and betrayal. She shook her head, wiping away tears. I loved you, Marcus, she whispered. Honestly, I never thought it would end like this. I had neither the strength nor the desire to react to these words. There was a gaping emptiness in my soul. Will it end? I repeated quietly. Yes, Vanessa, it will end. I'm filing for divorce. She jumped up, her eyes wide with horror. No, don't get upset. Please. She rushed towards me, trying to grab my hands, but I pulled away. The decision has been made, I said firmly. And believe me, you won't be able to get anything out of me this time. Your plan has failed. Vanessa sobbed, shaking her head. What plan are you talking about? Do you think that we are deliberately? That I am deliberately? Enough, I interrupted, barely managing to keep my composure. Maybe you personally didn't plan the whole intrigue from the very beginning. But the fact remains, you cheated on me and even chose a lover from your father's circle to solve the family's financial problems. What is that called if not a plan? She burst into tears again, kneeling in front of me. Forgive me. Forgive me. I was a fool. We will lose everything without you. Mom and Dad, they will go crazy. I looked down at her, feeling both pity and disgust. Yesterday, I might have rushed to console her and assure her that everything would be fine, but not now. Get up, I said wearily. Don't humiliate yourself. Vanessa raised her tear-stained face. Let's fix everything, I beg you. Don't ruin our family. Our family? There was ice in my voice. Vanessa, there is no family anymore. You destroyed it with your own hands. She covered her face, silently crying. I took a step back, trying not to give in to the pity that stirred dangerously inside me. But the image from the photograph appeared before my eyes again, her lips pressed against someone else's. I'll contact my lawyer tomorrow, I said evenly. We'll draw up the divorce papers. According to the prenuptial agreement, each of us will keep our own. I'll leave you your car, your personal accounts, everything that was yours before the marriage. But the Sinclairs won't get a cent of my fortune. Vanessa dropped her hands, her lips trembling. Is that all? She whispered. You're going to erase me from your life just like that? But weren't you the one who did it first? I answered harshly. She couldn't find anything to say. She just let out a quiet cry, like a wounded animal. It was already unbearable for me to see this. I turned around and went to the door. Before leaving, he stopped and threw over his shoulder. I'll rent a room in a hotel for a while so as not to disturb you while you pack. I hope you'll leave my house within a week." Vanessa raised her head. "Marcus, darling, don't drive me away. We even need to talk, discuss." "It's too late to talk," I snapped. "Everything has already been said." I walked out, closing the door softly behind me, and stood in the dark corridor. From the living room came the heartbreaking sobs of my almost ex-wife. I closed my eyes, trying to control myself. My heart ached with pain, but my mind triumphed. I had not given in to either blackmail or tears. Now it was time to bring the matter to an end. The next morning, I woke up in the hotel room where I had checked in for the night, feeling empty but also strangely relieved. Now that the decision had been made, all that was left was to act coolly. The first thing I did was call my divorce lawyer, Stephen Hale, whom I had consulted with after the contract conversation. Hearing my calm but firm voice, Stephen set up a meeting for that day without further ado. At the lawyer's office, I laid all my cards on the table. I told him about the Sinclair family's demand to annul the prenuptial agreement, about Vanessa's infidelity, and my intention to divorce immediately. Stephen listened attentively, taking notes. He asked to see the prenuptial agreement itself. I pulled out a copy of the agreement from a folder I had brought from home and handed it to the lawyer. Stephen ran his eyes over the pages, chuckling occasionally. "The contract is very one-sided," he noted. "According to the terms, in the event of a divorce, neither party has any claim on the other's property, except for pre-agreed gifts or sums. There is no provision for alimony either, is there?" "That's right," I nodded. "I didn't think about such details when I signed it, but now I'm glad that everything is exactly like that." The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "This will certainly work in your favor. However, be prepared. The other side will most likely try to challenge the agreement, especially if there is a lot of money at stake for your wife and her family." "There's a lot of money at stake," I sighed. "Basically, their entire fortune, which is almost gone now." I explained briefly about the Sinclairs' financial problems. Stephen shook his head. "I see, so we can expect anything from them. But let them try, we have strong trump cards. Firstly, the contract itself was drawn up on their initiative, and we have witnesses to this. By the way, do you have any confirmation that it was they who insisted?" "My mother and my friend know about it," I answered. "I told them then how surprised I was by the family's demand on the eve of the wedding." "Excellent. Their evidence will help to rebut the argument about any pressure from your side," the lawyer noted. "Secondly, the spouse's infidelity also contributes. Formally, since you have a contract, the issue of marital infidelity does not affect the division of property, but the moral factor is still on your side. If the case goes to court, public disclosure of the fact of infidelity will damage your wife's reputation, which they clearly do not want." I nodded. I was more concerned with justice than reputation, but it was necessary to understand the balance of power. "Here's the plan," Stephen continued, folding the papers. "Today we'll file a lawsuit for divorce, citing adultery on the part of the wife as the reason. We'll attach a copy of the prenuptial agreement. The court is unlikely to drag out the case under these circumstances unless they start the process of challenging the contract. But frankly speaking, they have little chance. The agreement is legally competently drawn up. Both signed it voluntarily, certified by a notary. They won't be able to prove pressure. No one pressured you, for sure, and on the part of the bride. It's unlikely that Vanessa would lie to the court about her own parents. She's capable of a lot now," I quietly remarked, remembering her desperate pleas that night. "But I hope it won't come to outright lies." Stephen and I discussed a few more details. He advised me to temporarily freeze the joint accounts and access to funds in case Vanessa or her parents tried to withdraw something. Fortunately, almost all of my assets have always been separate thanks to the same contract. "And the last question," the lawyer said, closing the folder with documents. "Do you want to demand compensation for moral damages or a public apology from Vanessa? In some cases, cheating spouses do this to soften the conditions." I thought for a moment, then shook my head. "No, I just want to end this marriage and put an end to it. I don't need any money from her, nor do I need her to apologize to the public. This is a personal matter." Stephen smiled knowingly, respectfully. "Well then, let's get started. I'll submit the documents in a couple of hours. Your wife will receive official notification, most likely tomorrow." I said goodbye to the lawyer and went outside. The day was clear and cold. I took a deep breath. The first step towards freedom had been taken. However, by evening it became clear that everything would not go smoothly. First, Vanessa herself called me. I did not pick up the phone. It was too early for conversation. Then, at about 8 in the evening, there was a knock on the door of my hotel room. When I opened it, I saw William Sinclair on the threshold. He had obviously found out where I was staying on purpose. His gaze was gloomy, and he was clutching a cane in his hand for the sake of respectability, I suppose, and not out of necessity. "Marcus, we need to talk," he said from the doorway. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped back to let him in. He entered, looking around the room as if checking to see how comfortable I was being outside the house. "I'm listening to you," I said coldly, remaining standing. William turned to face me, his face hard. "I don't intend to beat around the bush," he began abruptly. "You filed for divorce, didn't you?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Your daughter will soon receive a summons." Turtles danced on Sinclair's skulls. "Are you really going to throw Vanessa away like an unnecessary thing after everything that happened between you?" I clenched my fists, trying to keep myself under control. "After everything that happened," I repeated. "What happened, William? Deception, exploitation, betrayal. Your daughter cheated on me with your own business friend. Is that everything a reason to save the marriage?" He winced, but quickly pulled himself together. "Youth makes mistakes. Yes, it stumbled, but you were a wonderful couple. We can settle everything quietly, without scandals." "Settle it?" I snorted. "Are you suggesting that we hush up the story and continue living as if nothing happened?" "Why not?" Sinclair snapped. "For the sake of appearances, for the sake of reputation, both yours and ours. We, for our part, are prepared to, compensate for moral damages." He pronounced the last words with obvious difficulty. It even seemed to me that he had misheard. "Compensate?" I asked again. "Are you offering me money so that I don't divorce your daughter?" William blushed, but nodded. "Name the amount. Perhaps we can find a solution that will make everyone happy." I was so angry that I almost lost my sight. I took a step toward him, almost losing my composure. "Listen to me carefully," I said through gritted teeth. "You tried to buy me back then, before the wedding, with your prenuptial agreement to protect yourself. Now you're trying to buy me to save your own skin. Enough. I'm not for sale." "Marcus." He began, but I didn't let him get another word in. "No, listen to me," I raised my voice. "Your family has done everything to make sure I can never trust you again. Your intrigues have destroyed my marriage. And now you stand here and think that it's only a question of money. You're wrong. It's a question of honor and self-respect. I will not stay with a woman who cheated on me, and I will not help people who have plotted behind my back." William turned white with rage. "You'll regret it," he began threateningly. "No, you will regret it," I interrupted in a steely tone. "If you try to challenge the divorce or the contract, I have enough evidence of your uncleanliness, including photographs of your daughter's infidelity. Do you want publicity? Please, I am not embarrassed by the court, so I advise you to accept the reality. I am divorcing on the terms of the contract. Period." We stared at each other for a few seconds. Finally, William looked away. He looked 10 years older. "You're a cruel man, Marcus," he said, heading for the exit. "We were wrong to accept you into the family." "You finally told the truth," I replied with a bitter smile. "We were both wrong about the family." He wanted to add something else, but just waved his hand and left, loudly slamming the door. I sank heavily onto the bed. My hands were shaking from the adrenaline that had surged through me. But in my soul, in addition to anger, there was relief. The point of no return had been passed. Neither threats nor money could turn me away from the path. All that was left was to see the matter through to the end. 2 months after I filed for divorce, the final court hearing took place. A lot had happened during that time. The Sinclairs had tried to stall for time, then decided not to air their dirty laundry in public and agreed to a divorce by mutual consent to avoid a public scandal. They had not dared to challenge the prenuptial agreement. My lawyer had informed their lawyers that we had irrefutable evidence of its voluntary signing and of Vanessa's infidelity. Apparently, common sense had prevailed. Despite the arrangements, I still had to show up in court, a formality necessary to get the judge to approve our agreement. The small family courtroom smelled of polished wood and papers. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Stephen. A few feet away, Vanessa sat with her lawyer. She looked pale and thin. When she met my gaze, she immediately looked down. I looked away, trying to keep my emotions to myself. The judge, a kindly elderly man in glasses, quickly looked over the documents submitted. He asked us a couple of routine questions about the voluntary nature of the decision to divorce and the absence of disputed property issues. Does the defendant confirm that the marriage contract of such and such a date remains in force and that the parties have agreed to be guided by it? The judge asked, looking at Vanessa. Her lawyer nodded. Yes, Your Honor. We confirm the fulfillment of the terms of the agreement. My client does not require any additional payments or property. I glanced at Vanessa. She sat there with her shoulders slumped, looking broken. At that moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I reminded myself of what I had been through, and the feeling of pity dulled. The judge wrote something down, then announced, "The court approves the parties' agreement to dissolve the marriage. The marriage contract is recognized as valid and subject to execution. The marriage between Marcus Gray and Vanessa Gray, née Sinclair, is dissolved." The words echoed in my ears. The marriage was over. I involuntarily exhaled, feeling the tension that had been building for the past months subside. It was over. As we stood to leave the courtroom, Vanessa suddenly rose from her seat and came toward me. Her attorney raised his eyebrows in surprise, but did not intervene. Stephen stood alertly by my side. We stood face to face in the emptying courtroom. For a few moments we were silent. Vanessa was the first to break the silence. "Marcus." Her voice was hoarse. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." I looked at her, not knowing what to say. Up close, she looked even more miserable, circles under her eyes, trembling lips. It was hard to recognize the once brilliant Vanessa Sinclair in this woman. "I'm so sorry it happened," she continued quietly. "It's my fault. You deserve better." My heart sank. Despite everything, part of me still regretted the broken love, but nothing could be brought back. "I also regret that everything is like this," I finally answered, "but it will be right." She nodded, swallowing tears. She wanted to say something else, but then Melinda Sinclair appeared in the doorway. Vanessa's mother called out to her daughter in a dry tone. "Vanessa, let's go. Don't be late." Vanessa flinched and backed away like a cornered animal. "Goodbye, Marcus," was all she whispered. "Goodbye," I answered quietly. She hurried toward the exit where her mother stood. Melinda gave me an icy look, a mixture of anger and bitterness, but I watched her go without any anger. At that moment, I didn't even want to hate them. It was all over. When the door closed behind them, Stephen patted me on the shoulder. "You have endured this with dignity. Now a new chapter of your life lies ahead." I smiled sadly. "Thanks, Steve. I'm glad it all ended in a civilized manner." We shook hands and the lawyer left. I was left standing in the middle of the empty courtroom, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. The marriage I had once given my whole heart to was now officially history. I looked at my left wrist, where the watch Vanessa had given me for our first anniversary had once been. I had taken it off the day I found out about the affair and never worn it again. Symbolically, time had run out on this chapter of my life. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and headed for the exit. The sun was shining brightly outside, as if the world hadn't noticed my personal drama. But for me, a new day was dawning without Vanessa, without the heavy burden of lies. And even though there was uncertainty ahead, I was now my own person again. After the official divorce, I felt like I had been washed up on the shore after a long, stormy ride. On the one hand, there was silence and relief; on the other, emptiness and loneliness. In the coming days, I tried to keep myself busy with work. I immersed myself in the Foundation's affairs, met with colleagues, and discussed new projects. But every evening, returning to my now empty apartment, I moved out of our house with Vanessa. Having sold it, it was too reminiscent of the past. I was faced with a painful silence. Those days, my family was especially supportive. My mother called almost every evening from Cincinnati. She, of course, knew everything I told her honestly about what had happened, and although she was upset about my failure in marriage, she said that she was glad. Finally, everything was cleared up, and I got rid of the bad people around me. Her simple words were a balm for me. My mother did not say, "But I warned you," did not gloat. She simply made it clear that she loved me. Rich or poor, married or divorced, it did not matter. Sometimes my little sister also connected to the phone. She tried to cheer me up with jokes, telling funny stories from her student days. I smiled, feeling how the melancholy gradually retreated under the onslaught of my native love. Tom didn't leave me either. He flew to New York on business, and every time he invited me to have a beer or go to a basketball game. With him, I could take my mind off things. We cheered loudly in the stands, argued about the prospects of tech startups, and reminisced about our student years. Tom rarely talked about the divorce. Only once, slightly tipsy, he slapped me on the shoulder and said, "Well, brother, you're like a phoenix now. You'll rise from the ashes and show everyone." I smiled then, strangely, but I really began to believe that I could be reborn after all this. Of course, there were difficult moments. Sometimes at night I would be overcome by memories. I would dream of happy days with Vanessa, her smile, the feeling of her hand in mine. I would wake up broken, with a lump in my throat. Sometimes I would feel angry. I would remember how they tried to deceive me, how they used me. I would clench my fists and pace the room to vent my anger. But day by day, these surges of emotion became weaker. My heart was covered with scars that no longer bled so much. One day, about a month after the divorce, I found an envelope from Vanessa in my mailbox. Inside was a letter. On several pages, in neat handwriting, she laid out her apologies and regrets. She wrote that she would never forget our time together, that she would blame herself for the rest of her life for what she had done. She asked me to find the strength to forgive her someday. I sat in the kitchen with this letter in my hands, staring for a long time at the lines that swam before my eyes. There was no anger or pleasure in my soul, only fatigue. I did not know if I could forgive, but I knew for sure that nothing could be returned anyway. In the end, I put the letter back in the envelope and hid it in a far drawer. Let it lie there as a reminder of what had happened and what should not happen again. I also met mutual friends who had recently seen Vanessa and me as an ideal couple. Some tried to ask cautiously, like, "What happened?" I avoided answering, citing irreconcilable differences. People understood from their looks that it was not worth interfering. Over time, the gossip died down. Fortunately, our divorce did not become a public story thanks to an agreement between the parties, and no revealing articles appeared in the press. I appreciated this. I certainly did not want scandalous fame. One way or another, life moved on. Every morning I woke up and realized that I was no longer connected to the Sinclair family or their problems. My head was once again filled only with my own worries and dreams. Gradually, I began to look to the future with cautious optimism. Yes, there was still trust to be restored, emotional wounds to be healed, but I no longer felt like a victim, rather like a survivor who had gained valuable experience. While I was nursing my own wounds, the Sinclair family's fortunes were unfolding swiftly and mercilessly. News of the financial collapse of their investment company leaked into business circles within weeks of our divorce. I learned bits and pieces of information from mutual friends and newspaper articles. William Sinclair's company declared bankruptcy. It turned out that the debts accumulated by the company exceeded all possible assets. A couple of bad investments, an economic downturn, and the Sinclair empire, which several generations were proud of, faltered and then collapsed completely. William was forced to file for voluntary liquidation of the fund in order to sell off the remaining assets and partially pay off creditors. Soon the family's property began to pass into other hands. The luxurious mansion in Connecticut, where lavish receptions had once been held, was put up for auction. There were rumors that some foreign investor had bought it for a sum significantly below the market price, just to cover the bank's debts. The Sinclair's collection of antiques and expensive cars were also sold at auctions. Melinda Sinclair, who always sparkled with diamonds, once showed up at a charity event without her famous jewelry. Probably the family jewels also had to be pawned or sold. I did not feel any malice, but rather a cold satisfaction at the justice of what was happening. What they had feared so much and were ready to commit baseness to prevent had happened, and not through my fault. Moreover, my participation could no longer help them in any way. Even if I had given half my fortune, it would only have delayed the inevitable for a short time. There were various rumors about William. Some said that after the collapse he had fallen seriously ill either with his heart or with his nerves. Melinda allegedly blamed her husband's incompetence for everything and even threatened divorce. But where could she go? Their social circle had instantly shrunk. As soon as the money had flown away, many friends had turned away from the Sinclair family. In high society, their name was now mentioned in whispers and with a sympathetic smile. High society rarely forgives those who have fallen from the top. I knew little about Vanessa. She stopped showing up at the events she used to attend. Mutual acquaintances said that after the divorce and the collapse of her father's business, she left New York. They said that she lived for some time with distant relatives in Florida or hid in a country house away from the shameful eyes of acquaintances. Nikolai Voronov, with whom she had an affair, did not last long in her life either. His name surfaced in connection with a scandalous deal, and he hastily left for abroad, leaving the Sinclairs alone with their problems. Apparently, the help he promised was an empty phrase. Sometimes I caught myself thinking about Vanessa. How is she coping? But I quickly pushed these thoughts away. It was not my concern now. She had made her choice, and she would have to deal with the consequences without me. Another detail was flashing through the financial news. The Sinclair family's creditors had filed a lawsuit to collect debts from their personal property. I knew that some of these debts were secured, and if the property was not enough, then perhaps the trust fund set up in Vanessa's name would also come under attack. It had once guaranteed her security, but in the event of bankruptcy, it could dry up. In the end, that's what happened. According to inside information, almost all of the trust funds went to paying off the family's debts. Vanessa was essentially left with nothing, except, perhaps, her personal belongings. The story was, in essence, banal. A wealthy family lived in luxury, took risks, believing that well-being would last forever, but miscalculated. And when trouble came, no tricks could save either the business or the status. I did not rejoice at their fall, but I did not sympathize either. My own scars from their betrayal were too fresh. In any case, within 6 months of my divorce, the Sinclair name had all but disappeared from the gossip columns and social media. The newspapers carried only a brief report about the completion of the bankruptcy proceedings of William Sinclair's investment fund. The once powerful family had quietly and ingloriously disappeared into oblivion, having lost almost everything they owned. The irony was that, in trying to preserve their fortune at any cost, they had ended up losing it entirely. The freedom I had gained gradually ceased to be a frightening unknown and turned into a field of new possibilities. I decided to use this period of my life to reconsider my goals and values. Money, of which I had more than enough, was no longer an end in itself for me, but rather a tool for achieving something meaningful. First, I finally got to do what I had dreamed of since my youth: charity work in the fields of education and science. Even as a teenager, I promised myself that if I became rich, I would help talented children from poor families get a chance. And now the time has come to fulfill this promise. I founded a scholarship fund for students from low-income families who want to study engineering and biotechnology. My mother and I selected the first scholarship recipients together. She read their essays about their dreams, sometimes shedding tears, remembering my own. Secondly, I took a break from the mad rush of business and allowed myself to live for the soul. Traveling, which I had never had time for before, became part of my new life. I visited Europe, walked along the ancient streets of Paris and London, visited science museums, which I had been crazy about since school. I learned to surf on the coast of California, although I got a few sips of water, but it was incredibly fun. I made new acquaintances this time with people who were interested not in my money or status, but in common interests. Somewhere on one of the Pyrenean passes, sitting by an evening campfire with a group of tourists, I caught myself thinking that I was smiling sincerely and freely, as I had not smiled for a long time. My professional ambitions suddenly became more vivid. I decided to build my next project differently, without looking back at super profits and investors, but with an eye on long-term benefit to people. Together with Tom, I persuaded him to join. We organized a research lab in Cincinnati. My hometown seemed to me the right place for a new start. There, at the university, we supported the bold ideas of young scientists, financed the development of inexpensive medical devices for rural clinics. I often visited my homeland, visited my mother, dined on her signature meatloaf at the kitchen table of my childhood, and caught myself feeling deeply satisfied. It was for such moments that I once tore myself out of poverty, to return and make life around me at least a little better. Sometimes I was asked, mostly by journalists or distant acquaintances, whether I planned to marry again, to start a family. Each time I just smiled evasively. Deep down, I had not lost faith in love, but I was in no hurry. I wanted to first find harmony with myself, to understand what my path should be. And if on this path I meet a person who loves me, and not my achievements, then I will think about a new marriage. In the evenings, when I returned to my modest compared to my former luxury apartment in Cincinnati, I felt pleasantly tired. On my living room wall hung a photograph of me and my mother at the foundation's first scholarship award ceremony. We were both smiling, she proudly, I was a little sheepishly. This photograph reminded me every day that true wealth is not measured by your bank account, but by the good you can do for your loved ones and your community. My new life was not a perfect fairy tale. Shadows of the past sometimes rolled in, but I learned to look at them philosophically. Experience, however bitter, made me wiser. I began a new chapter without illusions, but also without fear. I knew the price of betrayal, but I believed that somewhere ahead, loyalty and true happiness awaited me. In the meantime, I simply lived honestly, with an open heart and with hope for the future. Standing one day at dawn by the window of my new apartment, I watched the first rays of the sun color the roofs of the neighboring houses. This city was waking up to a new life, and I was with it. A hard lesson, full of pain and disappointment, was left behind, but a road lay ahead that I had to walk with a clean slate. I thought of the boy from Cincinnati who once vowed to come back a different man. Well, he kept his promise, though the road was more winding than he imagined. I thought of Marcus, who believed in love and trusted people, and Marcus, who had been burned by betrayal. It was as if these versions of myself had met inside, shaken hands, and made peace. I realized that no experience is wasted. From the boy came a man who knows the value of poverty and wealth, love and betrayal. There was an old photograph on the windowsill. I had recently found it in my mother's albums. In the picture, she and I were standing on the porch of our old house on the day I left for college. A thin young man with shining eyes full of hope and a tired but happy mother were hugging each other. Back then, his whole life was ahead of him and seemed simple. I smiled at the guy in the picture. If only he knew what was waiting for him. But I probably wouldn't change a thing. All the trials brought me to where I am today. And today I have the most important thing myself. My knowledge, my reputation, my loved ones, who were and remain close not for money or benefit, but out of love. I am still passionate about science and work. I am interested in living and creating. Yes, a scar remains on my heart, but it only reminds me of how important it is to value yourself and choose those who value you. Life is unpredictable. It can take you from poverty to the top of wealth, and then hit you so hard that you fall to the very bottom. But as long as you have honesty with yourself and people who care about you for no reason, you will never disappear. I learned this. I finished my cold coffee and threw the window wide open. Fresh morning air rushed into the room, smelling of new hopes. Somewhere out there ahead was my new chapter without lies, without calculation, with an open soul. I took a deep breath and felt my heart beat evenly and calmly. My name is Marcus Gray. I have been through a lot and still am myself. And now I look to the future without fear, but with a smile, knowing that every ending of a story is the beginning of a new one. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.